And I knew when I started meeting people in this field, I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. I'm quite curious and I am quite nosy. So the cool part about being in T2 is that you get to kind of figure out what everybody's doing at the lab, from your scientists and engineers, your program managers, your legal office, your security office, your leadership. You are involved in all of it. And that's kind of a dream come true for the type of people that enjoy doing technology transfer.
Welcome to the Transfer Files, inside the world of federal innovation. This is your insider's look at how Federal Laboratories bring groundbreaking technologies to market. I'm your host, Andrea Nelson. In every episode, we'll bring you insights and expertise from throughout the world of tech transfer. Asking somebody what they do is a pretty baseline question. It's one of the first 2 or 3 questions that get the ball rolling in a conversation. But when some people tell you about their jobs, you find out a lot more about them than just what they do between the hours of 9 and 5. Paige George, to me, is one of those people. She started working for the Navy as an intern in high school. After college, she was a mechanical engineer for the Naval Surface Warfare Center, or NAVSEA, in Panama City, Florida, where they develop tech for sea and space and everywhere in between. After a few years, she discovered technology transfer, and she knew it was a match for her natural interests and curiosity. Now, she's the tech transfer manager at NAVSEA Panama City Division. She's also a board member and committee chair for the Federal Lab Consortium, the FLC, where she focuses on bringing people together from government and industry across the innovation ecosystem. Paige's enthusiasm for her work and dedication to the mission behind T2 really stood out to me, and they were contagious. I hope you enjoy our conversation.
Paige, thank you so much for joining us today.
Not a problem.
Let's start out with some background. How did you come into tech transfer? Because everyone has such a unique story.
I think that's what's so exciting about technology transfer, because everybody comes into it from a completely different background. I've met people who are scientists and engineers, people with business backgrounds, marketing. So my background is in mechanical engineering. I started working for the Navy in high school as an intern, got my engineering degree, and I started in diving and life support systems, designing diving systems for Navy divers, Air Force divers, Army divers. Panama City, where I'm from, is known as the home of military diver, the home of the military diver. We have the dive school that's on my command. So all military divers have to go through dive school in Panama City. So I spent over a decade in diving, and we utilized cooperative research and development agreements to get critical technologies into the Navy.
Wow. So in those early stages, because you were already working with the Navy and interning, were you aware of the tech transfer piece of that?
No. I came into the Navy under a scholarship program called the SMART Scholarship Program. And so the person who ran that program was our technology transfer manager at the time. And so just through getting to know him, I started to shadow him and slowly started to learn about T2. And then we started utilizing CRADAs in diving systems. And he invited me to my first FLC meeting back in 2015. And I knew when I started meeting people in this field, I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. I'm quite curious and I am quite nosy. So the cool part about being in T2 is that you get to kind of figure out what everybody's doing at the lab, from your scientists and engineers, your program managers, your legal office, your security office, your leadership. You are involved in all of it. And that's kind of a dream come true for the type of people that enjoy doing technology transfer.
How do you manage sort of translating between those different worlds or different kind of languages between researchers and marketing and all of those pieces?
I think it's a learning process. And what I have learned that really connects a lot of T2 people is the ability to ask questions. And when you do not know something, there is no fear of saying, hey, I don't understand this. How do you do that? Why did you do it like that? And it's through that curiosity that you start to learn the language of these different organizations, these different offices, and then you can start to translate. And that's really how I see my role as the T2 manager is our scientists and engineers are doing the critical work for our warfighters. So my job is I'm the umbrella to kind of support them in getting from point A to point B, doing the research that they want to do, that they need to do with who they want to do that research with. And I work with the legal office. I work with the security office. I provide the top cover. I handle all of the agreements, making sure that what they're doing is legal, is safe, follows all of our, follows all the law, the statute, the instructions. So that way they get to do what they need to do. So that way they don't have to deal with all of the bureaucracy that, comes along with government work.
And what are the big areas of focus for research and commercialization at Panama City specifically?
Yep. So we are the Naval Surface Warfare Center, part of the NAVSEA SysCom in the Department of the Navy. And our particular laboratory, our main focus areas are diving and life support systems, mine countermeasures, expeditionary warfare. So we kind of run quite the gamut, they say, from seabed to space. We handle the landing craft air cushion, which is kind of a giant hovercraft that flies over water and land. It's pretty exciting to see. You'll see it flying through the pass onto the beach. Tourists love it. We do underwater vehicles, various underwater vehicle technology, underwater vehicle security systems. The Navy has more airplanes than the Air Force. So, I mean, when you say like, what does the Navy do from bottom of the seafloor all the way into space? So all of the SysComs, so NAVSEA, that's where the warfare centers are, where all the shipyards live. We do a lot of the underwater vehicle technologies and all of the ship maintenance. We hold all of the ships at the big shipyards. And then you have Nav Air, where they do all of the airplanes. We have NAVSUP, NAVFAC, NAVWAR. They do all the information technologies, computer systems. So it really, anything you can think of, the Navy probably has a hand in it in some form or fashion.
And some of those, I fly on airplanes. That's a very common thing for the public, but the commercialization side within the Navy and the DoD is a little different than the other agencies. Can you kind of talk about how it works for you as opposed to some of the other federal agencies?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So when I first came to FLC and I wasn't as familiar with T2 as I obviously am now, my initial thought about T2 is spin out. You think spin out. So we're taking federally developed technologies and licensing them to industry to support the national economy and to provide services for the American people who pay for all of the technologies that we develop in the federal government. And that's incredibly important, but that is not the only focus. And that's not the main focus in the Department of Defense. Our customer in the DoD are warfighters. We have a very specific mission in the Department of Defense. So the way that technology transfer plays in that is more of how do we develop technologies that can be dual use? We do a lot of that, but also how do we get to the non-traditional industry that really has the solutions that our warfighter needs? How can we be more agile in our ability to get technology very quickly from the marketplace into the hands of our warfighters? And so T2, in that sense, we do lots of cooperative research and development agreements. We have our traditional companies that you work with. I mean, you can probably name a bunch of them off the top of your head. Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, all these big, giant government contractors, which are fantastic. So government acquisition is great. But there are a lot of small businesses that really have the cutting edge technologies, and it's not an easy pipeline to get into the government acquisition process. So really where T2 comes into play is opening the aperture for who we can work with and how quickly we can work with them. And that's really where the DoD, I would say, kind of stands out a little bit from some of the other agencies. I don't want to say that I know for sure how all the other agencies run, but just, being in T2 for the last decade, I've kind of seen the trends, and I understand more where if I'm not licensing lots of technologies from my lab, I understand why now. Because before, you think, man, we don't really commercialize a lot of our tech. Are we not really supporting the T2 mission? It's like, no, absolutely. Because I have seen technologies that we developed at the Warfare Center get transferred to a company to complete the manufacturing or fill in the gaps. We do, dual research with this company, and then they have the final product that is then sold back to the Navy.
Right.
So they did license that technology, but it wasn't necessarily commercialized and sold to the public. But we did develop a technology that was, within 2 years from initial concept to technology in the fleet.
Wow.
So typically that is not how the government acquisition process works. So to get something where we're like, okay, here's our initial idea. We think that, for example, this is the example that I always like to talk about, is the diver's augmented vision display system. So we took a standard Kirby Morgan diving helmet that your deep sea divers use. So this is surface applied diving, where your gas is provided from a boat on topside. These guys will dive down to 300 feet of seawater, zero visibility, cold. They are not diving in the Caribbean. They are doing heavy manual labor in very turbid water, very cold water, very dark water. It's an incredibly dangerous job. And so with the David system, we have a see-through heads-up display that was inserted into this diving helmet, and it provides the ability for divers to see what they're doing. Topside can send them text messages. They can do like a 3D overlay of what they're working on. If they're changing a bolt underwater or they're doing some underwater welding, you can provide them with schematics. You can provide them with video. You can provide them anything that they need to help support the work that they're doing underwater. And that is a very advanced and very critical technology. And to get something like that from, hey, this would be a really cool idea, to the David is in most of our diving commands right now, is a huge accomplishment. And we were only able to do that because of patent license agreements, CRADAs, and that is where the value is, I think, for most of the Department of Defense. Now, we do commercialize technology, absolutely. But when I'm talking to my leadership to try and tell them, like, why is T2 so important to the Navy and why is it valuable to the missions that we, support, I'm not going to talk about licensing technology for commercial purposes, because that's not what we do. But if I say, hey, we can use these agreements, these non-FAR-based agreements, to get technology into the fleet, that's when they start to listen. Right. And that's really worked at my command. And there are a lot of Navy commands that have just flourished in their T2 programs, growing the local economic ecosystem around the lab, trying to attract more small businesses around the lab to give us more options for who we need to work with.
Has that conversation, the way that you present it to your superiors, has that been an evolution, either in your tenure or just in the larger sort of existence of T2? Though I'll acknowledge that DoD had a laboratory consortium before the FLC existed. So T2 has been present.
Yes, there are so many DoD T2 practitioners that are way more experienced than me. So I can only speak for my personal evolution of understanding what provides value to your laboratory. And so what I learned in the beginning was commercialization, licensing. You need to take your patents and you need to commercialize them. That is what your role is. And I just couldn't make the connection. Like, how am I supporting the warfighter when I'm focusing on commercial products? When in reality, the goal for the DoD when you talk commercialization is dual use capabilities. But again, commercialization is always important. If I can take a Navy developed technology and commercialize it, that is fantastic. But my number one goal is to support our mission areas.
Right. And national security is part of the mission of technology transfer.
Absolutely.
Too. So that comes back to the American public. That makes sense to me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm probably speaking out of turn, but when I think of NIH, they're doing lots of research and development in medications, health sciences, but they don't manufacture that. Mm-hmm. And they're not, their customer is the American people. Right. So when they are licensing their technologies, that is their mission. Yeah. Their end user is the American people and consumers of health. For the Department of Defense, our end user, our customer, the people that we are supporting is different.
Mm-hmm. Are there things that, even though the end user is typically different, are there things that can be gleaned from the way that you do it? And the tools that you use to really make that possible and do it so speedily, that maybe could be applicable in other tech transfer offices?
Oh, absolutely. You cannot do this job in a silo. You cannot do this job on your own. I would not be able to build a T2 office by myself. That is one of the biggest values I think that FLC brings to the table is the cross collaboration between agencies, between laboratories, where when I come here to the FLC national meeting every year, the majority of the time I just spend talking to other people, asking them like, hey, here's a problem that I have. How would you do it at your lab? Or how does your agency handle situations like this? Because even though we all typically use the same statutes, we use the same instructions, everybody does it different. Every attorney interprets things in a different way. Every lab has figured out a very interesting or nuanced way to utilize a certain agreement or a certain way of, doing things. And so using other laboratories' best practices is really the only way that I have been able to build T2 at my lab. Because again, we are curious people in the T2 world. And so asking questions is something that we are pretty good at. Because again, if someone said, hey, I want to be a T2 practitioner, what should I get a degree in? I wouldn't even know how to answer that. Because again, I'm an engineer. A lot of our T2 people are PhD researchers. They are marketing people. They are business people. I think I met someone who was a police officer and then got into T2.
Wow.
So it really runs the gamut, which is, again, why I think T2 is such an exciting career field, because you will not meet one person that has kind of the same background and history that you do.
Yeah.
So if you want to learn, go talk to someone in T2. There's the wild stories, the interesting ways that we utilize the law to get real work done quickly is incredibly exciting.
Since you did bring up FLC, I would love to talk about your involvement in FLC, because now you're a member of the board. And you already have your hands full at your day job. So what is it about what made you want to get involved, and what is it that you're hoping to see grow out of the FLC in the next few years?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, I came to my first FLC national meeting in 2015. In 2019, I became the Southeast Regional Coordinator, and I wasn't even the ORDA at my lab yet. I was the STEM Outreach Director. So I've kind of done a lot of different things. So I was leading our STEM Outreach program at my laboratory, but I was still coming to the national meeting. And so I became the Southeast Regional Coordinator, started coming to the board meeting, started learning more about the internal workings of a consortium like this. And then really, let's see, in 2021, 2022, I became the Facilitate Committee. COVID, the years have just kind of muddled together. So I'm trying to give you an accurate timeline, but I just feel like I've always been here. I've always been on the board. But yeah, so it's 2024 now. So yeah, it's been quite a while that, I've been involved on the board. And, again, on this board of people, we have people from the Department of Defense. We have people from NIH. We have people, they really run the gamut of all the federal agencies. So when we get together to have board meetings every quarter, I come away, I feel like taking more than I provide. Because, these people are the movers and the shakers in the FLC world. And I just feel so fortunate to get to surround myself with people like this. And again, I try and use my position on the FLC board as a way to support my laboratory. And that's one of, I think, the selling points that I try and tell people, like, hey, you should be part of the FLC board because you're providing value to the consortium just by being on the board. But you can also provide so much value to your laboratory, because when you are part of developing the direction and the strategy that the FLC moves in, that only provides benefit to you as well in your laboratory. So, for example, when I was the Southeast Regional Coordinator, we set up a technology-based series on underwater vehicles, which is one of the mission areas of my laboratory. So every 2 months, we would, either partner with someone in industry or another federal laboratory who works in the underwater vehicle space. And they would just give a talk on what they do, what kind of partnerships they're looking for, or we highlight, specific partnerships that have happened and why they were so successful. And that got a lot of attention from my leadership because it's interesting and it is one of our mission areas. So I could connect, researchers at my laboratory with some of the people that we highlighted in the series. We also did a lab showcase on my laboratory, which again, we partnered with my public affairs office to develop the video and put it on YouTube. So I would like to think that I contribute a little bit to the board, but I have really benefited so much from being around all of these incredible people who really, truly believe in the mission of the Federal Laboratory Consortium and why technology transfer is so valuable. Because, when you break it down to the most basic level, we're trying to be good stewards of taxpayer money. The federal government, depending on the year, can receive up to 70% of all congressional research and development dollars. And so because the federal labs receive so much of that investment, it is important for us to be good stewards of that money. And we are taxpayers as well. So if we have technology that's been developed in a federal laboratory, we should do whatever we can to ensure that it benefits them, as many people as possible.
Right. And in your time at FLC, you've been involved in the facilitate chair, like you said. And for listeners who maybe don't know what that means, that is the pillar of FLC that really focuses on bringing people together so that these partnerships can happen. And it's such a contact sport, as I've heard, and I've really clung on to that. So how have you approached that as the chair in the aftermath of COVID? And contact is very different than it used to be, even still.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So during COVID, that's when we did that underwater vehicle technology series. And that was really beneficial because it forced another access point to the federal laboratories. You cannot replace in-person meetings and events, but now that we also have utilized these various virtual platforms to, share the work that we're doing, it really has added more access to the federal labs, which is so important. Because if I say, hey, we have this conference in California, my researchers aren't really, it's not easy to just get up and go and travel to the other side of the United States. But because we have access to so many of these fantastic virtual platforms, we can do both and. Now, getting back in person, there is no replacement for that. But now that we can do both so well, it has really increased our engagement. So when I think of the Facilitate Committee, I immediately think it's synonymous with engagement. How do we increase engagement? Because what we do as the FLC is we want to provide value. Like, who are our constituents? When we think of the who in our mission, it is our federal T2 professionals. And then how do we do that and why? So why we want to maximize impact of federal technology transfer. And so when I'm looking at facilitation of federal T2, I'm not trying to do what our lab reps do and what our laboratory T2 people do. What I'm trying to do is create opportunities for our T2 professionals to do what they do best. And so how do we do that? Well, through national partnerships, our national partners have great conferences and events that we don't have to put on. We can go and have a booth. We can go and be speakers. We can go and talk about what the federal labs do. We can talk about the federal investment in research and development. We can talk about the importance of small business and how we get small business into the government acquisition pipeline. Like, there are so many ways that we can create those opportunities for, collision between industry and academia and the federal laboratories.
Is there anything either from your position in the FLC or just as a professional in T2, any kind of wish list items that you would love to see, policy, communities, organizations that you would love to see kind of arise in the next few years?
We'll have to think about that. That's a good question. That's a big question. That's a big question. So again, I keep the word engagement and the word access keeps coming up. And so what I would love to see continued and to grow is those increased opportunities. So for the FLC to continue to grow our national partnerships, for the FLC to continue to help grow the prestige of the position of a T2 professional and what that is. We have our friends, Autumn, the university T2 organization, they're a lot bigger than the FLC. How do we make sure that the FLC becomes more prominent, more of a player in this space? And I think a lot of it has to do with, people, when they think of like the federal government, there's a perception, of what the federal government does. And again, I'm looking from a DoD perspective. What do we do behind the fence? People, when I say, hey, in my small little town in Panama City, when we do STEM outreach with kids, I'll say, hey, did you know we have a Navy base here? And they're like, yeah. So do you know what we do? And they're like, no. So trying to allow people to kind of see a little bit into the work that's going on and how people can leverage the results of their money, of the money that they spend in taxes to promote, the United States, promote the security of the United States, the economic security of the United States. So getting back to your question, it's access, providing access. How do we get our people that are part of the FLC out into all of these other professional consortiums, getting the word out? And I really think we have been moving pretty well in that direction, especially based on our latest strategic campaign plan that we put together, that we signed last year. The focus really is getting in connection with people. Our promote committee is absolutely phenomenal, and in the way that they are, doing, providing better ways of communication, new emails, the weekly digest that they put out, the website. Our educate committee is really rocking and rolling with webinars and different education opportunities. I mean, this meeting this week has been absolutely phenomenal. So we are really, really working on expanding our reach. And I think that is what's going to, that's going to be the big push in the future, that the federal labs are here. We are ready to do business, and we want to do business with you.
Beautiful. Well, that sounds like there's no better note to end on. So Paige George, thank you so much for being with us.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the Transfer Files, your insider's look at federal tech transfer. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay connected for more episodes exploring how hundreds of government laboratories and countless industry partners are driving innovations that shape our lives.